In mid-June, a shipment of 112 critical containers packed with medical supplies, solar power units, and industrial equipment left Qingdao, China, bound for Burkina Faso, routed through the Port of Lomé, Togo. All papers clean, payment confirmed, trucks already waiting near the border. But when the shipment arrived, it didn't move. No reason given, no explanation, just silence. 72 hours passed. Hospitals in Kaya began rationing dialysis machines. Solar installations in Saba stalled. Water pump stations in the north sputtered to half capacity. By hour 96, a whispered leak emerged from a customs official in Lomé. There's pressure, political, very high up. Orders came to freeze anything linked to the Burkina account. Word is, it's coming from abroad. That night, Captain Ibrahim Traoré received a secure call from a retired AU security advisor. They're sending you a message, Captain. This is about the IMF rejection. The lithium nationalization. You pushed too far too fast. Now they're showing you who controls the ports. Traoré didn't respond. No outrage, no appeal, just one order issued before dawn. Prepare the Western Zone. We're building a gate they cannot shut. 3 weeks later, without fanfare, without donor banners or international monitors, he stood before a wall of shipping containers stacked like a fortress in the dust-blown west. Steel cranes loomed behind him, bulldozers carved new roads, and a single metallic sign read National Dry Port Project, Burkina Faso. The state broadcaster streamed it live. Traoré said just one sentence. We've waited long enough at other people's gates. It's time they queue at ours. No shots were fired, but in Paris, in Brussels, and Washington they heard it, loud and clear. This wasn't just a port, it was a front, and Burkina Faso had just opened a new theater of war, one paved in asphalt, not bullets. The West saw it as a port. Traoré saw it as a weapon. Built 250 kilometers inland, the Burkina Faso dry port wasn't just a logistics hub. It was a direct challenge to every pressure point the global supply chain had weaponized against Africa for decades. No coastline, no foreign ownership, no World Bank observers, no European customs scanners, only cranes, data, and sovereignty. It rose from the red dust like a citadel designed not for war, but for survival. Yet in a world where trade routes could be blocked with a keystroke, a sovereign port was more dangerous than a missile. Traoré knew the old game too well. Landlocked nations depended on coastal countries. Coastal countries depended on ports. And ports from Abidjan to Dakar were often managed by foreign consortiums. That meant every shipment moving into Burkina Faso passed through invisible hands that could squeeze, delay, reroute, or lose cargo with impunity. This wasn't commerce. This was control, until now. The dry port flipped the model. Instead of relying on the sea, Traoré built toward the interior. AES allies Mali and Niger signed on immediately. Within weeks, joint railway projects were redirected to connect straight to the new terminal. A fleet of AES-flagged cargo trains was commissioned, bypassing the fragile coastal bottlenecks and building a spiderweb of movement across the continent. The software running it custom-coded by AES engineers. AES encryption, AES satellite surveillance, AES biometric access. No one outside the alliance could see inside the network, and that terrified them. In Berlin, a leaked cable from a high-level EU trade negotiator put it plainly. If Burkina Faso succeeds, the Sahel becomes unchokeable. We lose leverage across an entire corridor. In Washington, analysts warned of non-aligned trade corridors. In Paris, logistics giants like Bolloré began quietly lobbying their embassies. The port hadn't even finished construction, but the fear had already arrived, and it wasn't unfounded. Traoré had weaponized the one thing most African nations were taught to ignore: independence of movement. With the dry port as the nucleus, he was quietly building the first truly sovereign logistics grid in post-colonial Africa. No need for IMF inspection teams, no dependency on EU environmental compliance forms, no French customs infrastructure embedded in partnership terminals. It was a customs-cleared black box powered by African code and African rail, and that made it untouchable. But it also made it a target. Within days of the announcement, cyber probes began hitting AES digital infrastructure. The data teams spotted them, masked IPs, routed through anonymous proxies. Algorithms flagged the intrusion patterns as matching known NATO-linked test scripts. Someone was scanning, looking for weaknesses. Simultaneously, offers flooded the desks of AES finance ministers. Aid packages, infrastructure partnerships, trade deal renegotiations. Every offer had a condition buried in the fine print dry port oversight required. Traore refused every one of them, not out of pride, but out of pattern recognition. He'd seen it before. First they offer support. Then they ask for visibility. Then, within months, your cargo manifests are being rerouted in the name of compliance. He wasn't building a port, he was building immunity. And so the port's defenses weren't just cranes and concrete. They were data centers, encrypted control towers, AI-driven cargo scans, and autonomous rail systems linked to underground power lines, hardwired to continue even under sabotage. The port's name, leaked from military documents, wasn't Logistics Hub West as expected. It was Project Spine. Why? Because Traore believed this wasn't about trade. It was about backbone. If they can strangle our shipments, he once told his war council, they can strangle our sovereignty. So we'll give them nothing to grab. What terrified global analysts wasn't just the port's existence, it was what it enabled. With that single hub, Burkina Faso could import heavy machinery without coastal screening, launch AES-wide food security routes, export gold, lithium, and uranium directly across the continent without passing through French customs terminals, create an alternate price discovery network for African resources. It wasn't a facility, it was a firewall. And though no shots had been fired, strategic planners in Brussels began using a new phrase. In confidential reports, unaligned logistics weaponization. In private rooms, they spoke plainly. Burkina Faso just launched the most dangerous structure on the continent. Not a military base, a port. 3 nights later, the first confirmed act of sabotage struck. A transformer near the western rail line exploded just after midnight. Power flickered across the network, but backup systems kicked in instantly, exactly as designed. The cargo flow didn't stop. But the message was clear. Someone was probing, escalating. At dawn, Traore visited the site in person. No media, no ceremony. Just boots on gravel and silent engineers resetting control panels. He didn't speak to cameras. But later that day, AES's encrypted internal bulletin carried a 4-word dispatch from his office: prepare for logistics warfare. And they did. Satellite imagery showed unexpected changes. Armored personnel carriers deployed discreetly along key rail choke points. Anti-drone systems installed near the port perimeter. Unmarked convoys rerouted inland under military escort. Burkina wasn't just defending cargo, it was militarizing infrastructure. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, panic was setting in. A leaked memo from a French military attaché in Dakar warned Traore has turned infrastructure into an ideological weapon, and worse, others are copying. In Niger, officials unveiled their own dry corridor blueprint, publicly thanking Burkina for the courage to break the dependency chain. In Bamako, Mali, new customs posts sprang up with no EU staff, in sight only AES symbols and local guards. It was spreading, quietly, virally. Not through force, but through example. By week's end, 5 more Sahel nations requested technical support for independent logistics sovereignty. What NATO had once dismissed as a symbolic act was now metastasizing into a movement. The West had ports. Africa at last had passage. And at the center of it all stood a captain who hadn't fired a single shot, but had dismantled decades of control with asphalt software and steel. The response came not with missiles, but with headlines. Western media outlets began a coordinated campaign. Articles appeared across major platforms: Burkina's rogue infrastructure. Unregulated trade corridors threaten regional stability. Is Traore undermining democratic norms? Analysts suddenly framed the dry port as a smuggling risk, a shadow economy hub, and a threat to international oversight. But in Ouagadougou, no one flinched. Traore's media team countered with quiet precision. They didn't argue, they showcased. A viral video showed solar panels from the dry port, lighting up an entire village overnight. Another clip captured a mother in Djibo, receiving emergency dialysis equipment flown in via the new rail corridor. Hashtags exploded across Francophone Africa. Our port, pour sovereignty, in steel. Africa delivers itself. Behind closed doors, pressure mounted. IMF advisors hinted that regional loan disbursements might be delayed, pending oversight of new logistics platforms. ECOWAS issued vague statements about coordination risks. A U.S. envoy requested a non-intrusive visit to Project Spine. All were denied. Traore convened his council again. We will not collapse under narrative. They cannot blockade a spirit. And then the unexpected twist. Ethiopia's foreign ministry issued a statement declaring interest in strategic partnership with the AES Dry Corridor. Kenya followed with a technical delegation. Even Tanzania sent observers. From the Sahel to the Horn, something was cracking. It wasn't just a trade route. It was a continental alignment. For the first time in decades, infrastructure was no longer a leash. It was a lever. And every container unloaded at Project Spine wasn't just cargo, it was a declaration, a whisper to the old world: Africa will no longer wait at your gates. We're building our own. But it was the next development that truly shifted the fault lines. Algeria made contact. Not quietly, not through back channels, openly at a Pan-African Trade Summit in Accra. Their delegation, usually cautious, requested formal access to Project Spine's data exchange protocols. The proposal was blunt. We offer our Mediterranean ports as exit points. You offer us a stake in the future. The room went silent. It was the first time a North African country had openly aligned itself with the AES framework. If accepted, it meant a bridge from Sahel to sea, controlled not by old colonial port authorities, but by Africans on both ends. Traore didn't respond immediately. He didn't need to. The message had already reached every capital from Rabat to Pretoria. Burkina Faso, a landlocked nation once dismissed as geopolitically insignificant, had become the gravitational center of a new continental axis, one defined not by military pacts, but by infrastructure sovereignty. The retaliation escalated. Suddenly, a string of corruption exposés targeting AES officials appeared in European outlets. Anonymous sources, leaked documents, none verified. At the same time, a major Western shipping insurance firm quietly blacklisted any route terminating at the dry port. Without insurance, trade financing became riskier. Investors hesitated, but Traore had anticipated this too. Burkina launched its own sovereign risk pool, backed by a coalition of AES central banks and discrete capital from non-Western partners. Within a month, trade flows resumed, smaller at first but steady. And something else changed. AES universities began offering new degrees: infrastructure intelligence, supply chain, sovereignty, port, cybersecurity. A generation once trained to manage dependency was now being trained to dismantle it. In Paris, an emergency roundtable was held. One diplomat summed up the unease. We used to worry about coups, now we fear codes. Because what Traore had built wasn't just asphalt and algorithms, it was a mindset, replicable, viral, contagious, and no airstrike sanction or narrative spin could stop it. Each train that departed Project Spine now carried more than goods. It carried proof that Africa, when united, when unmonitored, when unapologetic, was not a market. It was a force, and it had just learned how to move. Then came the silence. For 12 days, no new attacks. No foreign statements, no media distortion, just stillness. But inside the AES intelligence loop, silence was never peace, it was preparation. On day 13, Burkina's National Cyber Center intercepted a deep intrusion attempt, not a probe, a breach. The attacker had bypassed multiple firewalls using stolen AES diplomatic credentials. The target Project Spine's cargo routing algorithms code that dictated every inbound and outbound movement from ore to oxygen. The breach was neutralized within 90 seconds, but its origin traced to a private server farm in Frankfurt sent shockwaves through the alliance. It was no longer covert pressure. This was cyber warfare, coordinated, resourced, and desperate. And Traore summoned his technocrats. He didn't shout, he didn't posture. He simply said, "We expected this. Now, we escalate." What followed was unprecedented. AES activated Protocol Umbra, a silent shift in infrastructure intelligence policy. Every rail switch, every drone camera, every custom server was recoded to operate autonomously in case of full disconnection from global networks. In other words, if the world pulled the plug, AES ports would not blink. Encrypted data hubs were buried under reinforced bunkers. Cargo manifests were split across distributed ledgers, unreadable without consensus from multiple AES states. Satellite uplinks were diversified, using African-engineered CubeSats, launched in partnership with Asia-Pacific allies. And then a final move. Traore authorized the creation of the Sovereign Spine Index, a public blockchain-based system allowing African nations to transparently price trade and track their resources without relying on London, Paris, or New York. Gold, lithium, uranium, cocoa, phosphates. Every gram, kilogram, and ton logged, owned, priced, and moved on African terms. The West responded as expected, destabilizing opaque, unregulated, but the global South responded differently. Brazil requested access. Indonesia sent a trade attaché. Pakistan invited Traore for a state visit. And for the first time since independence, young Africans studying economics weren't just reading Western models, they were citing Project Spine as a case study in sovereignty logistics. Because this wasn't just a port, it was proof of concept. That when Africa stopped asking permission and started building in silence, the world's power maps began to blur. And the question was no longer whether the world would block it, it was whether they could. 6 months later, the dry season returned, but this time, the red dust of the Sahel didn't choke silence, it carried movement. Convoys rumbled across hardened roads. Trains painted with AES emblems split the horizon like arteries of a new body. The port that once existed only in whispers now buzzed with motion. Satellite images confirmed it. Project Spine was fully operational, and yet Traore remained silent. No interviews, no press tours, no podium declarations. His silence wasn't absence, it was strategy. Let the results speak. By then, the Sovereign Spine Index had already begun shifting commodity prices. For the first time, lithium from Burkina Faso fetched a premium without touching a European terminal. A cocoa consortium in Côte d'Ivoire negotiated directly with India, bypassing legacy trade brokers. Even oil-producing nations started inquiring about overland conversion corridors. The Atlantic world tried to respond. Sanctions were drafted, then stalled. Misinformation campaigns were launched, then discredited by independent Pan-African media cells. A new IMF-backed initiative, Resilient Africa, was quietly introduced, promising logistics support in exchange for transparency. Few signed on. In the shadows, one Western analyst wrote what others feared to admit: "We are no longer gatekeepers. The gate has moved inland, and we no longer have the key." The real shift, however, was not in ports or rail lines, but in psychology. In a small AES university near Ouahigouya, a young student stood before his class and presented a thesis titled "The Infrastructure of Dignity." His opening line, "We thought sovereignty was in our flags, but it was always in our supply chains." That sentiment spread. AES literature festivals began featuring engineers alongside poets. Port architects were profiled in children's books. Military academies offered joint courses in code security and container logistics. The tools of power had changed, and so had the heroes. And Traore, he remained where he had always been, not ahead of the world, but ahead of its assumptions. One evening, without announcement, he appeared at the edge of Project Spine. No cameras, no guards, just him standing before the hum of machines and the glint of rails stretching toward the horizon. He touched the steel frame of a container labeled AES 001. Inside not weapons, not gold, but medical drones, destined for clinics in northern Niger. A worker approached, confused. "Captain, why come here? There's nothing left to inspect." Traore turned eyes steady. "I didn't come to inspect," he said. "I came to remember." "Remember what? That we built this in silence. While they were watching the sky, we rewrote the ground." And with that, he stepped aside, letting the train pass one car at a time, each one loaded not just with cargo, but with a continent's reclaimed destiny. Because in a world obsessed with visibility, Traore had done the impossible. He changed everything, by moving in the places no one thought to look. The story of Project Spine is not merely the tale of a port or a railway. It is the emergence of a new doctrine, one that challenges centuries of imposed dependency and redefines the meaning of power in the modern African context. What Captain Ibrahim Traoré achieved through this project was not only infrastructural, it was philosophical. It taught Africa and perhaps the world that sovereignty is not declared by flags or national anthems, but by the control of the invisible systems that govern everyday life, logistics code, and movement. The first lesson is about strategy without spectacle. Traoré's genius lay not in shouting from podiums or seeking global applause. He understood something profound. Real transformation often happens in silence. While the world watched for coups or military aggression, he built algorithms. While critics expected parades and speeches, he laid concrete. His refusal to react publicly to sabotage, cyber attacks, or international slander was not weakness. It was clarity. He chose to let the results, not the rhetoric, reshape the narrative. In a world addicted to noise, Traoré's silence became his sharpest weapon. The second lesson lies in redefining the battlefield. For decades, Africa was viewed through the narrow lens of conflict wars, rebels, peacekeeping missions. But Traoré's dry port marked a shift in the battlefield itself. The conflict was no longer just over territory, it was over infrastructure. Not over tanks, but transport. Not missiles, but manifest codes. And in this new war, sovereignty was not defended at borders, but at bandwidths. It taught us that power today is not who controls the capital city, but who controls the cargo list. Thirdly, Project Spine exposed the fragility of global dependency chains. Burkina Faso's decision to bypass coastal ports and build inland logistics showed how the entire global order relies on choke points that are deliberately maintained. Coastal dependency is not an accident, it is a design. By reversing that logic and internalizing control, Burkina Faso didn't just protect its own trade. It disrupted the architecture of leverage itself. It proved that supply chains are not neutral, they are geopolitical weapons, and those who rely on them without control live under permanent threat. A fourth and critical lesson is the power of replication. Traoré didn't seek isolation. He didn't say Burkina first. Instead, he created a blueprint, one that Mali, Niger, and other AES nations could follow. Project Spine was not just an achievement, it was a template. It reminded us that the most powerful revolutions are the ones that can be copied. Like open-source software, it allowed others to iterate, adapt, and contribute. This spirit of shared autonomy redefines what Pan-Africanism can look like in practice, not as ideology, but as infrastructure. Fifth, the story illuminated the importance of narrative control. As soon as the port began gaining traction, Western media launched a campaign of fear, labeling it opaque, dangerous, anti-democratic. Yet Traore did not fight back with press conferences. He fought back with footage, solar panels lighting up a village, medical supplies reaching war zones, children cheering as trains passed. In a media landscape saturated with spin, Traore taught a new lesson. Truth travels faster when lived than when shouted. He shifted the arena from opinion to outcome. A sixth lesson, deeply symbolic, is about economic literacy and cultural pride. The creation of the Sovereign Spine Index sent a powerful message that pricing, valuation, and trade should no longer be externalized. By pricing lithium, gold, and cocoa on African terms, Traore reconnected economic control with cultural confidence. For decades, African youth were taught to reference the FTSE, the IMF, or the CAC 40. Now they had something local, meaningful, and mathematically sovereign to cite. The shift was not just technical, it was generational. Seventh, and perhaps most subtly, is the lesson of resilience through decentralization. Every layer of Project Spine, from autonomous rail lines to encrypted customs data, was designed to function under attack. Traore didn't build for peace, he built for interruption. The lesson here is clear. Sovereignty is not stability, it is prepared instability. In designing a system that could survive disconnection from global networks, he reminded Africa that true freedom is the ability to endure disruption without collapse. The eighth and final lesson is about vision rooted in humility. In the final scene of the story, Traore visits the dry port not to inspect, but to remember. That moment reveals the depth of his leadership. He does not place himself above the system. He returns in silence to witness its function, not as its master, but as its servant. The leader who knows when to build and when to step back is the rarest kind. Traore's humility, set against the monumental scope of his project, offers a profound insight. True revolutionaries do not chase visibility, they chase results. In conclusion, Project Spine is more than a chapter in Burkina Faso's history. It is a chapter in the evolving definition of African modernity. It challenges every nation, not just in Africa, but across the global South, to rethink what it means to be free. Freedom is not the right to speak, it is the capacity to act. It is not a speech at the UN, it is a convoy crossing a continent without permission. It is not recognition from abroad, it is recognition from within. If Traore's project teaches us anything, it is this: that sovereignty is not an event, it is an architecture. It must be built, guarded, rewired, and yes, sometimes buried underground, away from cameras, in anticipation of storms. Africa, long defined by what it lacked, has now offered the world a model of what can be built when nothing is given. No coastline, no approval, no applause, just vision, and the will to move without waiting. And that may be the greatest lesson of all. I watched the announcement of Project Spine from my phone in a dusty market in Bamako. For the first time in years, I didn't scroll past. I stood still. My grandfather once carried cocoa on his back for 2 days to reach the colonial rail line. Now our goods will ride AES trains. He died without seeing freedom. I lived to witness the blueprint of it. I'm a student in Nairobi. We study supply chain management from American textbooks. But last week, my professor walked in, threw the book on the table, and said, "Today we study Traore." I had goosebumps. He didn't need soldiers to fight. He used ports. He used silence. He used time. My father worked 20 years at the port of Abidjan. Every delay, every inspection, every missing container, he said it felt like someone else owned our future. When Project Spine launched, he cried, not for revenge, for relief, for the quiet dignity of a nation that says, "We'll move ourselves now, thank you." From Dakar, I've always heard the insults about Burkina Faso. No water, no sea, no chance, they said. But now I realize the truth. The ones they laughed at were the ones they feared most. No one saw them coming, and that's why they succeeded. I used to believe independence was about flags. Then I saw customs officials scanning cargo in their own language on AES-built systems. I realized then true independence is not when you can sing your anthem, it's when no one else can delay your medicine. In Lagos, we love to argue online, but for once we all agreed. Even those who opposed Traore politically had to admit this wasn't showmanship. It was legacy. You don't build ports like this for attention. You build them for your grandchildren. I am a Pan-Africanist in London. For years, people mocked our vision, called us dreamers, relics of Nkrumah. But Traore made the dream concrete literally. Rails, data, cranes. No speeches about Africa rising, just Africa moving. And no one could stop it. I live in Paris. I was born here, but I'm Congolese. When I read Le Monde calling Project Spine opaque, I laughed. Of course they find it dark. The lights are no longer under their control. For once, they're on the outside looking in. I'm from Zimbabwe. We know sanctions. We know isolation. But it's different. It's not about fighting the West. It's about ignoring them, about building as if they no longer matter. That kind of power, it terrifies them, and it inspires us. I work in logistics. I've seen how ports are used as levers. Want to delay a revolution, delay their fuel, want to punish a leader, stop their shipping insurance. Traore didn't just break the chain, he built his own workshop. My cousin works on the AES satellite team. When the encryption held during that Frankfurt cyber attack, we all celebrated like we won a football final. But it wasn't just tech, it was psychological. We proved they can't see inside our house anymore. As a mother, I cried when I saw the first shipment of medical drones arrive in northern Niger. My daughter needs insulin. Before we waited weeks, now 2 days. I don't care about politics. I care about her life, and Traore just gave it more time. I am from Ethiopia. When we heard Algeria offered its ports for AES cargo, people in my office stared at the screen. No one said a word, because we understood this is no longer just Sahel politics. This is continental shift. Quiet. Determined. African. I'm a Senegalese journalist. I've reported on dozens of failed development projects, overpriced roads, ghost airports, but Project Spine. It functioned before the ribbon was cut. That's the real miracle. Not that it was built, but that it worked. In Kinshasa, a group of engineering students has a new club. They call it the Traore League. They don't talk about politics. They talk about fiber optics, drainage systems, cargo routing software, and they talk like it matters because now it does. I work at a customs post in Benin. When they installed the AES scanners and switched the system to move Afric code, everything changed. No more lost papers. No more French consultants watching over my shoulder. I didn't just get new software. I got my dignity back. I've always feared coups. Not just the guns, but the way each one resets hope. But this was different. Traore didn't reset hope. He built it. Block by block, line by line. Not to replace the old system, to make it irrelevant. My uncle is a farmer near the Niger border. For years his millet sat unsold because trucks didn't come. Last week a train did. He sold everything. Paid off his debts. Sent his daughter to school. You want to talk geopolitics? Come ask him what sovereignty tastes like. I'm an old man now. I remember the rail lines the French built, straight lines, leading out of Africa, taking everything away. Now I see new lines forming, not to extract, but to connect. And I finally believe maybe we won't die waiting. I'm from Ghana. We weren't part of the AES, but we watched. And now we wonder what's stopping us. If Burkina Faso can do this with no sea, no IMF backing, no French base, what excuse do we have? I saw a child at a market in Ouagadougou playing with a toy train. On its side, he had written Spine, 2025. That child doesn't know about sanctions or debt or diplomacy, But he knows one thing: the train belongs to him. And maybe that's the most powerful thing of all.